Hello everybody, welcome to Roxborough House Roundtables. Today we have a special guest, Bruce Haynes. Professor Haynes is an adjunct professor at Philadelphia University. He teaches in the Law and Society Department. He's also the surrogate in Montgomery County and was involved in not only local but national politics not too long ago, involving marriage equality in Pennsylvania. So I'd like to first introduce the panel, and then we'll talk to Professor Haynes. You are?
I'm Kyle Ford.
I'm Kevin Pearley.
John Devoti.
Anika Thomas.
Okay, let's begin. Professor Haynes, so first, what is a surrogate so that we understand what they do, and then we'll get into exactly what happened.
Well, Professor Lane, in Pennsylvania, we don't use the word surrogate.
That's my Jersey.
That's a
Jersey
term.
stuff,
That's
right?
a Jersey term.
Yeah.
Under the Pennsylvania Constitution, a county like Montgomery County has both a register of wills and a clerk of the orphans court. With regard to the second part, the clerk of the orphans court, my job is to issue marriage licenses. That is, it's actually, I get elected every 4 years, county-wide. I get elected as the Register of Wills, and it is considered an ex officio job, which means that if I am the Register of Wills, I am automatically the Clerk of the Orphans Court. And as Clerk of the Orphans Court, I issue marriage licenses.
So I'd like to take you back to the summer. This summer of 2014 when all this...
No, to 2013.
2013.
Yeah.
All this started happening. 2013, same-sex marriage was not legal in Pennsylvania.
That's correct.
Okay. Why don't you take us to the events of that summer? What happened?
Well, I would say about the first week in July, we got a phone call from the attorney for two women who wanted to know if I would issue if I'd issue a marriage license to two women. And actually, I never spoke to the man. It got bounced around the office, and my solicitor, who's also, my first deputy, is also a lawyer. And I discussed it in depth, and I brought in my solicitor to discuss it, my clerk, and had several discussions with the commissioners and the county solicitor to decide what to do. Now, what had happened is a week or so before, the U.S. Supreme Court had come down with a decision in the Windsor case. Now, if you recall that case, it had to do with the Defense of Marriage Act. It was a federal act.
It's also called DOMA. Right?
DOMA, right. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, because Pennsylvania has its own. We refer to it as Little DOMA. Okay. But, and DOMA had been declared unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. And at that particular time, well, what it meant is that a same-sex marriage entered into in a state that permitted it had to be recognized by another state. Okay? Several states had passed laws, and even the national government, Congress, had passed a law saying the states that don't recognize same-sex marriages, they don't have to recognize same-sex marriages. Now,
so just to break that down, so if California recognizes same-sex marriage and a couple gets married in California,
right.
Then they move to New Jersey.
Right.
The law that applies is not that they're legally married.
Right. Well, but Jersey, you chose two examples that both have same-sex marriage, but what it would have been like, say, New York to Arizona, okay? And versus Arizona said, no, we're not going to do this. Now, I always thought we had in the U.S. Constitution, and you're a constitutional lawyer, help me out here, we have full faith and credit?
Yes.
Okay, why would they do that only with regard to marriage licenses and not my credit card? If I get a credit card in New York, how come Arizona still makes me pay it? Okay, in other words, it was a very interesting twist that Congress took that said the contract between individuals of the same gender, when entered into in a state, did not have to be recognized in another state. Of course, my contract with a bank for a credit card must be recognized in another state. That's the basis for full faith and credit. Anyway, so what happened is Windsor said that no, you can't do this. This is not. It's unconstitutional. Then the two ladies came in and were called my office to their counsel, and we decided to go ahead. When I say we, this was a. I took counsel on this case. The commissioners, the county solicitor, the solicitor from my office. We just decided, yes, we would do it, and made an arrangement to have the two women come in, and the communications officer for the county, Frank Custer, he issued a press release on it.
Okay, so let's stop there, because there's a lot of questions I have, and I'll open it up to anyone else has questions. What were your views on same-sex marriage, if you even had them, before these ladies called you?
My personal views is I hadn't thought about it in depth. I know I read Windsor when it came out, and I thought it was kind of interesting. The dissent in Windsor was, I think, Scalia's dissent. Hadn't really piqued my curiosity, but to sort of.
Because there's some who say, well, you were an advocate before.
No, I was not an advocate. I was a lawyer for what I thought was 100 years, but it's really close to 35. Mm-hmm. And it's never my intention to go around stretching, pushing the envelope, stretching the law, or breaking the law for that matter. But to put it another way, or to ask that question slightly differently, why didn't I do it earlier? I mean, I've been in office since 2008. Well, nobody asked me. Nobody, believe it or not, nobody had asked me since 2008 until the summer of 2013. Can my girlfriend and I get, in a same-sex relationship, can we get a marriage license? This is the very, very first time it had ever been asked. And I kind of figured that there would be ramifications to it. That's why I didn't make the decision on my own. Now, I wasn't the only one that was asked. Another county, the Register of Wills, who was a lawyer, he was asked, and he took no counsel. He said no. That's what the statute says, no. Then he got sued and ran up some rather large bills in the defense. And the commissioner said, why are we paying for this? Because it was politically not helpful for them. But in any case, I consulted a lot of people about this before. So I'm not an advocate, or what had not been a same-sex marriage advocate. I grew up in the South where in the 50s and the 60s, when you could see what pulling out a group of people and making them separate from everybody else was harmful, both to the majority and to the minority. Okay? I grew up in Virginia when I went to a segregated elementary school and a segregated high school. And we had a member in Virginia in the 50s, when I was growing up, we had a county, Prince Edward County, close their schools so they wouldn't have to integrate, wouldn't racially integrate their classes. So, I was familiar with segregation in a way, or the absence of equal protection. Now, I don't want to say that same-sex marriage and racial equality are the same. They're not. It's different, whole set of different values and elements. However, there is something in the core of the two efforts that I think is similar, not identical, but maybe similar. So I made the decision.
Again, stop you right there.
Okay, go right ahead.
So when you're making the decision process, were you contacted by any advocates of marriage equality? Did people come to you, lobbying you in any way or any of your staff to make your decision?
No, not at all. We weren't contacted until, I think we snuck up on everybody. I mean, I certainly snuck up on the press. The press had no idea what we were doing. When they started coming by my office, I'd invite them in the office, and I would answer all their questions. I think I snuck up on Rachel Maddow. I mean, I wound up on Rachel Maddow. She could call me in, and I said, we were issuing marriage licenses. We got press all over the place, and we've rearranged the office so that we have a bunch of protesters in, and we don't want them to interfere with the process of marriage licenses, but at the same time, they have a right to protest, okay? I told the sheriff who was up there working with us, I said, I know some of these are elderly people, these protesters, can we put some chairs along the wall? He said, don't do that. They sit down and they never leave. I said, okay, fine, we won't do that.
It's their version of a sit-in.
Right, exactly. So what we did was we had the press in and everything. Rachel Maddow called my office and wanted me to talk to them. There's a studio down in Center City, and I said initially no, one of the commissioners and I were going to have dinner that night, and one of the people that kind of gave me some political advice, are you nuts? Here's your opportunity to go, Rachel Maddow, you're going to go out to dinner with one of the commissioners? Come on, let's put this in perspective. Snuck up on everybody. And not only that, we snuck up on the protesters too. Because the protesters really came to my office not knowing what this was all about. Because as a general rule, the people that came in for the protesting were anti-abortion, anti-choice. And they didn't have any signs ready for marriage equality. And so I'm sure they just went down, a bunch of them went down to the CVS and got some poster board, and their signs were saying, marriage equals one man plus one woman. That was handwritten on a white sign.
So,
Carl.
one of the things you were just talking about was like the whole separation thing. And I was just talking about yesterday, we were talking about the right to vote.
Right.
And like slavery and things like that. And we was talking about the 15th Amendment, which says the right to citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And one of the questions I asked my teacher was, what if they denied people like of that community the right to vote? Not like other like race or anything, but like people of same-sex marriage, the right to vote because their sexual preference. And I was curious as to your views on how do you feel like that's like a really new way of discrimination against people? And my question to him was, how would like the Supreme Court interpret something like that based off the 15th Amendment here, which doesn't say anything about your preference?
That's interesting, Kyle. I had never thought about losing your right to vote because of I think the better word might be orientation rather than preference. Because none of the gay people that I know have a preference. It's just what they are. And so the orientation, losing your right to vote on account of that, that's interesting. I mean, I do read these, there's a blog out there called Right Wing Watch, and there's always some legislator who wants to put gay people in jail or have them shot or something, pretty awful, and denying them their right. That's interesting. The 14th Amendment has a lot about voting too. Right. If you deny votes to African Americans under the 14th Amendment, you lose members in Congress. We saw how that worked between 1865 and 1965. 15th Amendment wasn't any good either. Didn't work for 100 years. So, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. I'd be interested in yours as a constitutional.
I know, as usual, Kyle's caught me things. He always
Good
has
for
an
you,
interesting.
Tom. Good
He always
for
has an interesting take on things. Just getting back though, when you're sitting there having to make a decision, because no one ever asked you to make the decision before.
Right.
So now that asking, you're well aware that same-sex marriage was not allowed in the Commonwealth.
Well, I have the statutes right here. I can show them to you. And there's two statutes that cover it. One is the definition of what is take one if you want. I don't know if you guys want to do this because we are on the radio.
We're actually taking a piece of paper. Looking at
taking a piece of paper. Here, this is the definition part. Here, go ahead and around. Marriage, a civil contract by which one man and one woman. Take that. One man and one woman. Let me see. Take each other for husband and wife. Okay, that's one statute. And then the other statute, which goes back to our little DOMA, it is hereby declared to be the strong and long-standing public policy of this Commonwealth that marriage shall be between one man and one woman, a marriage between two persons of the same sex, which was entered into in another state or foreign jurisdiction, even if valid where entered into, shall be void in this Commonwealth. So we had our own little DOMA. So I mean, actually, this whole argument is on two levels.
But it was pretty clear.
Well, the statute was clear. Let me show you what, to me, was also clear. Okay, and that's the Pennsylvania Constitution. Here, that's a copy. Now I've just pulled out 3 sections. I don't know if you got one of them. Here. I just pulled out 3 sections. And this is section number 1. This is like the preamble. All men, and remember now, this is a 1968 document, okay? And in those days, we didn't talk, we actually had a constitutional convention
in Pennsylvania.
And this is the result of the Constitutional Convention. And so when they use the word men, they mean everybody. All men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent and indivisible rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life, liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, reputation, and of pursuing their own happiness. Okay? And then we have section 26. Neither the Commonwealth or any other political subdivision shall deny to any person the enjoyment of civil right, nor discriminate against any person in the exercise of civil right. Okay? Now, that requires the answer to a question: is marriage a civil right? Okay? Mm-hmm. I think it is, and it's not just me. I think Loving versus Virginia, or Virginia versus Loving,
Supreme Court case,
U.S. Supreme Court said yes, it is. And I think for those people that are religious, I think the Pope has weighed in on this. I don't think it's this Pope. I think it was the Pope in the 19th century, maybe early 20th century, who said marriage is a fundamental right. Okay, it's we don't care where you are politically, but we do say that you have the right to be married. Okay, that's the church's position. It gets a little stickier when you're talking about who gets to marry. Okay, and that's why I brought in section 28. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because of the sex of the individual. Okay? Now, I think if you take all 3 of those together, that you come up with a pretty good constitutional rationale, at least in this Commonwealth, for same-sex marriage equality. Now, when you have a statute that is contrary to the Constitution, who wins? The Constitution wins. Okay? And that's what I would have told your friend yesterday, but I never spoke to you.
That brings up the next question.
Yeah.
Because I was just talking about this round table with some other individual, and he said to me he would not come here. He would not be in the same room with you, because you are a very dangerous person.
Okay.
But he said, I said, why? And he said, who does he think he is? He thinks he's a judge to interpret the law. So how would you answer if he came here and actually addressed you and said, how do you what power do you think you have in order to interpret the law?
Well, that's interesting. I think where it kind of, okay, there's a bunch of answers to that. Number one, if he doesn't like what I did, there are two ways to get rid of me, okay? One is, and believe me, I'm not trying to pick a fight here, okay? But one is to impeach me. And that never happened. Number two would be, I'm up for re-election next year. Let him organize a group of people that are anti-me and vote me out of office. Again, I'm not trying to pick a fight, but those are the two ways to do it.
But as the Register of Wills,
right,
do you have the power to interpret statutes under your authority?
No, I don't, because the Commonwealth Court has just told me I didn't. So let's, we got exactly. Although it's kind of interesting that the judge who wrote the decision saying I didn't have that authority.
Okay. Just so people know out there, you were sued by the
government. Maybe we should do that.
We'll get to that. Let's get to that later. So that's what we're talking about. I promise. Let's just go to chronology first.
Okay, let's do the chronology.
Then we'll get to the point that you're sued later on.
I just want to make a point about the constitutional part, though. Marriage has always, in everybody's mind, it was originally defined as a man and a woman. Specifically because you want to have a couple, a male and a female, together to raise children. And it's even going beyond religion. Every society has their version of marriage, and it's always been a man and a woman. So you're not only interpreting the Constitution, you're redefining a fundamental term. How can you do that?
Well, because that's a great question, but what we have done in the last, say, 100 years is we have made so many benefits available to married people, okay, that we don't have made available to people who live together, are in love, want to be married, but they're denied that right or that benefit simply because they are of the same gender. Okay, and let me give you an example. Well, before I do that, just let me point out that I've never counted them, but supposedly there are around 8,000 federal benefits and about 4,000 state benefits that you get because of the marital status, because you're married. Okay, that was the issue in Windsor. Windsor, she owed a tremendous amount of money to the IRS because she had been with this woman for so many years, and there was this federal DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, and they would not consider her married. Okay, but the same thing in Pennsylvania. If you die, your wife pays 0, ladies and gentlemen, 0% inheritance tax. However, your significant other pays 15%. Even though you both went into a mortgage together, you both have been paying the mortgage together, you've been conducting your lives as if you were married, okay? But because you're not married, or under Pennsylvania law before the Jones decision in Whitewood, which is May 20th, you would have owed 15%, okay, of what you should have inherited or would have inherited had you been married. Now, I understand what you're talking about in terms of definitions. Mm-hmm. However, those definitions were made long before we established a whole plethora of benefits. And if we are talking about equal protection, why should we benefit one group of people simply because they were born with an orientation which is not same-sex, and why should we discriminate against a group of people that were born with with same-sex orientation? So, I mean, I understand what you're saying about defining marriage. However, what we've done with marriage is we've added a whole series of benefits which we're denying a group of people. I don't see the rational basis for denying that group of people. Okay, I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a follow-up to this. So then wouldn't it make more sense just to get rid of marriage as a civil contract? Since it is just a contract, just make it a contract. It's a civil contract, and don't even take the marriage word out of it in the first place.
That would probably have avoided a lot of this, what we're talking about right now. In other words, you just have a contract that you can go into with regard to the state, and let religions deal with whatever they want to call, whatever they want to do. But our law in Pennsylvania is so inextricably intertwined with religion. We have a statute that says who can officiate over marriages. Now it's judges and magistrates and religious people, people that are members of religious organizations. And so it's, and that latest one was from 2009, that reinterpretation. So I agree with you. As a matter of fact, in Pennsylvania, there were no marriage licenses until the 1880s. Okay? They weren't considered important. Okay? There was no inheritance tax. Okay? Women couldn't vote in Pennsylvania. Marriage licenses became important just about the same time that birth certificates became important.
So when you were going back to the thing, though, when you were there making a decision, did you understand when you were going to grant these two women a license that there was going to be a firestorm coming down on you?
Yes, but not the extent to which it fired up.
Can you tell, just if we give us a flavor of what you faced?
Well, phone calls, a lot of phone calls. The office screened a lot out for me, so I didn't listen to them. I got a lot of emails, and I have two adult daughters who sort of screened out a few of my emails, the more scurrilous ones.
What was the tenor of these emails?
Well, I didn't see them all, so I can't tell you, but they're pretty nasty,
Did you receive any death threats or anything?
No, I didn't receive. I did get some threats about they wanted to demonstrate in front of my home, at which time Risa Furman, who's the district attorney, her first deputy, Kevin Steele, it's a friend of mine, he calls me up and asks me if I'd like two things. Number one, would I like a security evaluation? They do that. The commissioners have that, but as a row officer, I've never asked for it. And number two, based upon their findings, would they like an enhanced county security, at least for the next 3 to 6 months? And I told them I didn't think it was necessary. I really don't. I think it will. But I was never in particular fear, not at all. But people do get nasty. I mean, people wanted me arrested. And the demonstration people, the people that came up with the demonstration, they had also, they were screaming at me, "Stop it! Now stop it right now! You've got to stop this!" I said, "No, I appreciate your point of view. I'm not going to." Although, let's do the chronology again, if you do mind. All right, the first one was issued July 24th. Okay, and for the next week or so, we're waiting. And one of my friends said, I showed a sense of, hey, I broke the law. Aren't you going to stop me? Because we didn't know who was going to sue me or to stop me, and we didn't know when it was going to happen. What it turned out was after Windsor, the Attorney General, Kathleen Kane, when this happened, she said no, she wasn't going to go and try to get me to stop. And she made it, I don't know whether this was a press conference or I think it was a press conference. She made a statement. I believe that Pennsylvania law is totally unconstitutional, wholly unconstitutional. So that knocked her out.
Okay. As Attorney General.
As the Attorney General
of the Commonwealth, her position is to interpret the law.
Right. And she chose not to. Now the next person that could stop me was Risa Furman, the DA from Montgomery County, and she and I know each other a little bit because we've run twice together, and I see her at the functions and all that sort of stuff, and She called. I had made a comment. Somebody had asked me, "Have you spoken to the district attorney?" And I said, "No, we have not discussed this." So immediately she called me so she could then say, "Yes, we've discussed it." And she said, "Stop it." I said, you stop it. Listen, the better way to do this is to say no and have him sue you. And I said, "Well, I think that train has left the station, man. I'm doing it." Okay. Same thing with Bruce Castor, who was one of the commissioners. He called me. He's also a personal friend. He says, "You know what you should do? You should say no and then let him sue you." I've been told that by all sorts of lawyers. I said, no, I took it to the stand.
But you didn't say no.
No, I didn't.
You said yes. So
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get at is, I understand you gave us the legal.
Yeah.
And that was interesting. But I want to know why you did it. Was there, you had to understand you were going to face some heat.
Some.
You had to understand.
Yeah.
Even though it was more than you expected, you had to understand that. You're a clever guy. You knew there were people who were very emotionally attached to this issue. Why, when you sat there and had to make the decision as the person in charge, and I know that you consulted, but you had to make the decision, what is the element that tipped you?
Looking back, I really, I'm not sure if there was an element that tipped me. I simply decided to do it. Okay? That's what I want to do. I had a judge come up to me and said, I know why you did it. You did it for politics. And I said, "Judge, I didn't." You're not going to believe me, Judge, but we did not talk about the political ramifications. Didn't discuss it with the commissioners. Didn't discuss it with the solicitor. Nothing. There was no discussion about it. Matter of fact, could have blown up in my face. We issued, when I decided to issue it, I just decided to put my head down and go through it.
Did you think it was the right thing morally?
Oh yes. But absolutely the right thing morally. But see, all these questions about me kind of take the focus off where it ought to be, and that is, it's about people wanting to get married, wanting to solemnize their relationship and get all of the rights, benefits, that they can get in the society we have put together for them. Okay, and the focus ought not, I don't think, should be on me, because number one, I'm not a crusader. Number two, I simply made an administrative decision to do what I believe is right based on law in the Pennsylvania Constitution. We were wondering who was going to sue us, and it turns out that we were sued by the Department of Health because they thought initially that we were screwing up the statistics. We have to report how many marriages every month, and we just give them the number of marriages, and they thought we were messing around with their docs on reporting. It turned out that a day or so before, we had decided we had thought about changing the Commonwealth reporting documents. And then my first deputy said, I feel uncomfortable. Let's just put in an addendum, okay? So instead of having one column, marriages, you have three columns. Heterosexual, and then boy, girl. And we submitted it like that on a separate piece of paper. So when we pointed that out to the Commonwealth, to the Department of Health, that we weren't messing with your stats. We just added to them. They amended their complaint. They amended the complaint, and they did it totally in a very strange way. They sued me in mandamus.
What does that mean?
Okay, mandamus is it's a writ, actually. It's not a complaint. It's a writ where you go to a judge and you say, you got a public official here who is not performing a purely ministerial act. Okay, it's not one that he has any discretion over. Say, for instance, a postal clerk. Postal clerk, you give him 49 cents, he's got to give you a stamp. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If he refuses to do that, you can go into court, and the judge will then issue an order to order the clerk to give you that. Okay? Our position is that because I am also the Register of Wills, and there is some case law that says as Register of Wills, I am quasi-judicial. I have to make decisions as to who should represent an estate. In the event of two different wills, I have to decide which is a forgery. In the event of questions about the competency of the testator, of the guy who died or the woman who died, I have to make those decisions. And because it's quasi-judicial, we were under the impression, until we were told to the contrary by Orphans Court, by Commonwealth Court, that also would sort of blend over into Orphans Court. And as the clerk of the Orphans Court, I had, the law prohibits me from issuing a marriage license to an intoxicated person. So we figured
so you had discretion.
Discretion as to you're
so
drunk and you're not.
So your argument to that gentleman is, wait, as part of my position as Register of Wills,
I have discretion.
I have discretion. I'm not the postage clerk who
Right.
has to give 49 cents.
Yeah.
Rather, I have the ability to say yes or no. And that's
Based
a big
upon
difference.
age and all the things.
Competency, everything
right, all
that goes within your
Yeah, but the Commonwealth Court told me no.
Okay, we'll get to Commonwealth.
Yeah, okay.
How about okay, so you have the Attorney General.
She says no.
She's backing off. She's not giving any heat.
Yeah.
You have some local people, minor heat, but nothing big. How about the governor, Corbett?
Well, the governor, aside from this really incredibly stupid comments he made about, well, marriage license between two people of the same sex, like being able to marry a brother and a sister. You know, remember that was the summer of, that was maybe the fall of last year. He didn't know what to do. Okay. Now there's another subset that could sue me and stop it. People who passed the law about, let's say, Little Dumber. Little Dumber was passed in, I don't know, early 2000s. And all you got to do is find those legislators, and they can sue me in court.
Right.
Okay, which is, I didn't think he wanted to do that, so he just went to the Department of Health and said, which he appoints, and they sued me in a mandamus action. We countered with no jurisdiction because I have to be sued by, let's see, was it? You know, I'm having a moment here. I think we said that I'm not to be sued among, oh, I know what it is. As a member of the AOPC, Office of, Affiliated Office of Pennsylvania Courts, that's my office, AOP, part of the AOPC. I can only be sued in the Supreme Court, Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And Commonwealth Court disagreed. They said they had original jurisdiction because I do perform ministerial functions.
And that's the ability to be sued. That's
right. Yeah.
Where and when.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Just want to again bring it back a little because
okay.
again there's so much. When you made the decision, obviously protesters came to you.
Sure.
And I've heard various different arguments against same-sex marriage being made. So I wanted to know if you consider them or even or thought about it. The first thing is marriage is for the purpose of children. Mm-hmm. And that obviously people of the same sex can't procreate. Did you have an argument?
I've heard that argument before, but if I were to have to decide whether or not I can give you a marriage license based upon whether or not you can have children, wouldn't I have to have some kind of doctor's certificate? Lady comes in with a guy and he's 65, she's 65. Mm-hmm. What's up with that? I mean, can she have a baby? I don't know. I would need professional advice on that. I'm sorry, I'd like to give you a marriage license, but I can't. Bring something in from the doctor saying you can have a baby.
Or you get a younger woman who's infertile.
Exactly.
Or a man who's infertile. So
yeah, exactly. I want to know whether or not you can. Or else I'm not giving you marriage. I'm not giving you marriage.
Talk about discretion, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Another point would be if they are infertile, they can't have children, they can still adopt. And in Pennsylvania, I believe same-sex couples are allowed to adopt.
They are allowed.
So where's the difference?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's an interesting thing. Well, you know, the basis for that decision in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was the fact that same-sex couples can adopt if they're not married. And in Pennsylvania, you can't get married. So we've got to be able to permit them to adopt. That was the logic behind that case. Now it's a different ball field now. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Let me give you another one. Go ahead,
I have a real
Scott.
quick question. Not really shoot two guys where you guys are talking about and everything, but how exactly did the media catch wind of when you issued the license? I can't imagine they were standing in the room when you gave it to them. But
We issued a press release. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Actually, what happened was we issued a press release, and something like tomorrow at 10 o'clock, we'll be making a statement out on the courthouse steps. And those two ladies that originally called up, they backed out. They didn't want any part of it. They were poster people for it because they're both doctors, both MDs that have been living together for 10, 15 years, maybe even had some children. But we had issued the press release already. And our press officer, is tight with everybody. And I started getting phone calls. I got phone calls from North Carolina. I got phone calls from California. And it was like, I don't know what to say. It was like just overwhelmed. We just had so many people.
Another argument
Yes, go
that's
ahead.
out there is the slippery slope when you were getting into it. And giving what I've heard, and this is almost quoting some of these people, I'm sure you've heard it. If you allow a man to marry another man or a woman to marry another woman, what's to prevent them from marrying a sheep or a dog or a horse? Okay? And I've heard, have we all heard that?
I've heard it, sure. That's not what I was confronted with. Okay? I wasn't confronted with that. Let's deal with reality here.
Weren't some of those statements made when interracial marriages were proposed?
Yeah.
Like the exact same
Yeah,
statements?
yeah.
About
Absolutely.
Yeah, when Loving came by, you were getting the exact same thing. The answer to that question is obviously you're allowed to issue licenses between two consenting adults. As far as I know, a sheep is not a consenting adult.
Yeah, but see,
The one that is a good question, though, is what if you're doing multiple marriage?
what about polygamy?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, see, I mean, I like your argument, but with regard to animals and whatever argument you might have with regard to polygamy, except for the fact that I choose consciously not to deal with that argument because it's not in front of me. You know what I'm saying? So, and then there's a second part of that. When you argue about animals, you're kind of raising the level of that argument to something that should be considered. And I don't think it is, but I don't want to get involved in that. Now, polygamy, I have not developed any sort of sense of any kind of argument as to the pros and cons of polygamy because that hasn't come up to me.
But I think I've actually been confronted with that. And
Yeah.
my answer to that is the 14th Amendment. It talks about equal protection of law.
Right.
And the law doesn't allow anyone to marry animals. So
Yeah.
the law applies equally to everybody.
Well-
In regards to polygamy, the law says that man or anyone should only marry one person. So the law applies equally across the field. The problem with denying same-sex marriage is you're saying that the law, marriage, applies to heterosexuals, but does not apply to homosexuals, therefore a violation of equal protection. So that's usually my answer to that question.
I think that's a perfectly legitimate response. That's the way I guess I would argue it if I had to argue it, but I'd rather jump behind the fact that I didn't have to deal with it.
We're preparing you for if you ever do it.
Right, exactly.
I mean, the other argument is this is a legal contract. We have no problem with businesses having more than one partner.
Right.
So why do we have a problem with the marriage having more than one partner? And we have plenty of precedent for that,
Yeah,
even in the Bible,
In the Bible.
of
Yes,
multiple
it's-
marriages. So there's...
Which
and-
brings up the article, this exact question, the religious angle. It's assuming it is against the Bible. I know there's people who read it various different ways, but assuming that the Bible says it should not be, is that something that should be taken into account at all?
I don't think so. It's not. When I first started this job, there was a minor dispute going on about whether or not people could marry them, officiate at their own weddings. Okay, because we have a provision in the Pennsylvania Code that permits an official, like a judge or a minister, rabbi, whatever. And then we also have a separate provision, and it outlines how people can kind of marry themselves, you know. And it turned out that several of the registers, or clerks of the Orphans Court, were not issuing that kind of marriage license because they didn't feel that they felt that they belonged to a religion that had a minister. So if you belong to a religion that has a minister, you have to have a minister marry you, okay? So you could only get that kind of license if you were a Quaker or a Zoroastrian or something like that. And early on, I'm thinking, you know, we're a pretty populous state, county. So I got a lot of people coming in and asking for those kinds of marrying marriage licenses. And the first thing that I had to ask, in order, if I went along with that rule that these other clerks had invented, what question would I have to ask? What's your religion? Now tell me when it's appropriate for an elected official to ever ask a citizen, what's your religion? You know, I think zero. I think you're bingo. I think you're right on point there. And, you know, you want a self-marrying one, you got it. I'm not going to ask you if you're a Quaker or whatever. That's none of my. I don't see the compelling rationale why I should be put in that position to ask that question. So it's the same thing about marriage licenses. I think you know. Everybody's entitled to their religion, but nobody's, you know, they say everybody's entitled to their beliefs, but not their own facts, okay? Everybody's entitled to their religion, but I don't think their religion should impose itself or be permitted to be imposed on two people who want to take advantage of a whole bunch of government benefits. And the only reason they're prohibited is because of their sexual orientation.
Well, the other question would be, what if you have a couple that just wants the marriage license and doesn't want to have an official wedding? For example, again, back to the business contract. You know, people make business contracts. They don't necessarily need a judge to make that business contract. So why do they even need somebody to say you're married?
Well, that seems to me what would happen. Say you got two people, they simply get the self-marrying marriage license, and then remember now there's a second part of a marriage license. If you're married by a minister or a rabbi or a imam or whatever, that person certifies that that's what happened on a particular date and where. And they rip that off of it and they send it back to us. So that way we keep the data on it. Now with the self-marrying, you don't. Just both of them. We married each other on such and such a date, such and such a place. Now, do they have to do it, or what does the ceremony consist of? Anything they want. Anything they want. We don't get into that. They rip it off, mail it back to us.
I have a question because we were on the topic of the marriage license and everything. So you issued the marriage license to those two women, but now when they take it before a judge, does the judge have to marry them?
Good question.
Excellent question. Before May 20th, and we can talk about the importance of May 20th. No, they didn't have to. As a matter of fact, the president judge of Montgomery County said, sort of like, I don't know if it was in a memo, but he notified all of the district judges in the Commonwealth that he didn't believe that these marriage licenses that I was issuing were legitimate. Okay, so they're not obliged to make them. Now, since that's happened, since May 20th, somebody has to, some SOME, next word, body, B-O-D-Y, it's a body of judges or ethics. So they said, if you marry somebody, you can't turn people away because of being same-sex marriage. So as a result, some judges now say, I'm not marrying anybody. We have a DJ right outside Norristown.
How about a priest? Okay, I've heard this argument,
Yeah.
that I am opposed for religious grounds marrying these people, and they come to me now and say, marry us, be the presider, and I say no, that I could be in trouble now. I'm going to be forced to marry someone against my religion.
Go ahead.
But that's another question. For example, if a Jew for some reason wants to go to a Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest does not want, is he required to marry?
No,
Okay.
nobody's required to marry. I think that's one of those horribles that gets paraded by people who don't want same-sex marriage. And they say, well, look at us, if we're required to do it. Now, there's been some kind of marriage group out in New Mexico or something. Supposedly, their municipality has decided that they are a public accommodation in these little marriage chapels. They're public accommodation. And if they are a public accommodation, they have to marry people. I think that's ill-advised. I don't think that that would stand up anywhere. I don't think that there's any requirement that anybody marry anybody for that same reason. I mean, you can't make a priest marry.
I can tell you there are rabbis who will not officiate and mix marriages between, and no one's forcing them to do it. That's their own. We actually are running out of time, so I want to does anyone on the panel have an additional question? I think, thank you so much for coming today. There's more questions I'd like to ask you, and you're going to be coming here for those hearing on November 7th. On Law Day for further questions and to address these issues, whoever would like to. So I'd like to thank the panel, and I especially like to thank Professor Haynes for coming here today and explaining what I believe changed history not only in this Commonwealth, but perhaps throughout all the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.